Next up is Voices of Change with your hosts, Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Voices of Change is to connect, inform, and empower people to engage in social political change. Right here on Usula Radio. World news, local politics, saving money and investing, all this and more right here on Usula Radio. Your voice, your radio.
Welcome. You're listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio with your hosts Leslie Acosta and Aissia Richardson. Today, we're going to delve into a very interesting topic. We're not going to talk about negative things today. We're going to talk about positive and uplifting things today, in spite of what's happening worldwide in the world and even in the United States. The title of the show today is The Awakening, a spiritual perspective on this issue of the coronavirus. Since the world is in the midst of this fear-based and panic caused by this coronavirus disease, which is, we call it the COVID-19, it's a good time, I think, to look at this event by asking how bad really this is. Why is this happening? What is this teaching us? What is this teaching humanity? What is the spiritual perspective of the humanitarian crisis that we are facing today? The world has responded, I would say, with unprecedented speed and mobilization of resources. The global scientific community has shared the genomic and clinical data at unprecedented rates. Work on a vaccine is well underway. The World Health Organization declared an emergency of international concern. All of this happened in a fraction of the time it took to even identify, as you all remember, the avian flu in 1997. So the question really is, what is the spiritual perspective on this coronavirus? It is a projection, I would say, of fear that is being pushed out into the collective consciousness. We are constantly being bombarded by it again, and again. We all, as you all know, we all have illnesses on the planet every day, far worse than the coronavirus, but we are being traumatized by the story over and over again, injecting this fear into the conscience. This is also happens with natural disasters and political games, reporting of violence, and etc. We are constantly being fed this diet of fear programs. But today, we have three guests that we would like to introduce, and we're going to take a different perspective. We're going to take a spiritual perspective on this issue. We're going to talk about how this is a lesson that we're all learning and that we're all in this together. The first guest that we have is Jacqueline Prince. Jacqueline Prince, as an awakening and ascension guide, prime mission is to liberate humans from the ancient worn out programs of pain and suffering. She using her inner mapping or inner engineering techniques as a quantum engineer healer. We have Keith Gregory. Keith is a soul coach. He is the author of the book, Awakening the Sacred Masculine at the Turning of the Age. As a soul coach, his intentions is to always to empower you, to empower yourself, to create a life that is more heart-centered, soul-directed, and spiritually fulfilling. We also have William Dickinson. William is a certified yoga master and a New World activist. After decades of being immersed in top secret defense contracting and having traveled all 7 continents with the Peace Corps, now William is acutely aware of the many false programs and agendas that keeps humans enslaved in darkness. So welcome, Aissia, welcome. We also have another guest, Ginger. Can you Ginger, Aissia? We would like to see Ginger, but she's gone now.
Yeah, she's outside, but I'll bring her back in.
Okay, so we do have Ginger as a guest. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being on Voices of Change on Usula Radio. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. Let's start with Jacqueline. Jacqueline, you are heavy on this content of humans being liberated. We talk a lot about the awakening, the spiritual awakening. What does that mean? And how we can correlate that currently to the spiritual perspective of the awakening of the coronavirus. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well,
First, we want, excuse me, we want to understand that as a human species, there is a divine order to the evolution of our human consciousness, and that actually has a period of 26,000 years. Actually, it's 25,590 years, and at the end of the cycle, which is very very well ordered, and I won't get into that. There is a period where things where there's an ending of this one particular cycle and a beginning of a new. So we've just crossed over that that period. You know, I don't know if everyone was familiar with the Mayan calendar ending in December 21, 2012. And, you know, people were talking about, is that the end of the world, or, you know, what does that look like? What that represented was just us moving into a new era, a new time, the golden age, the age of Aquarius. And this, from a spiritual perspective, this global shutdown is about a resetting of that evolution of consciousness. In other words, humans are rising into another level of awareness. And so this is a time, kind of like everyone is being brought to a crossroads where everyone, and it's amazing how divine has actually played this out, where this is a touching every single human being on the planet, whereby we are being presented two parallel realities, and one is remaining in the old system that is very worn out, antiquated, and it is just not going to fit the consciousness of an elevated being. So we're going to see that falling away or being represented in tremendous chaos and confusion. And the choice is that some will rise and many will not. And so this, you have this choice to remain in this old system that is really based on fear mongering. I call this time psychological terrorism. I mean, this is just, we are being, from every angle imaginable, being perpetrated with fear. And I am not saying that COVID-19 is not real. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the level of fear that is going along with this is so very unnecessary. So the choice is, do you base your entire reality, your entire perspective on this fear, and or do you choose to, because there's a saying that where you place your attention is where your reality is. As a man thinketh, so it becomes. And when we begin to realize that we are creators, and as a man thinketh, so he becomes, what he becomes is what he attracts into his reality. So if you're placing your attention and believing in this tremendous fear and every storyline that goes along with that fear, then you attract those scenarios, situations, and conditions into your life that will reflect that fear in your life. Or you can choose to rise in faith and believe that you have divine power that is far greater than this dark, dense fear. Step out of the old system and be part of humans that are elevating, rising in consciousness to create a new world of vibrations of peace, love, harmony. And this is about, and Keith is really astute in this area. This is about pulling your reality into heart space.
Right.
And so it's beginning to live from a heart space and ask yourself, are these feelings that I'm feeling the way I want to feel? And to accept personal responsibility for the way you feel, because the way you feel actually is part of the creative process. And there's a whole,
Dynamic to that.
philosophy, a whole talk about how you acquire the tools to become that creator. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Okay.
Hard
Maybe
act
not
to
a
follow
nutshell,
right
but
there. That was a big nut right there.
Well, Keith, you are a soul coach. You are the author of the book, The Awakening, the Sacred Masculine at the Turning Ages. And as a soul coach, your intentions is always to empower people, to empower, yourself, to create a life that is more heart-centered, soul directed, and spiritually fulfilling. That is in essence what you do. In spite of all this, and eloquently, Jacqueline explained to us exactly what are the tools of power that you need to have a more fulfilling life and to be happy. What is your perspective on this and your take on this whole situation of the COVID-19, based on your experience as a soul coach?
Well, really, thank you for asking and speaking, Leslie. It's really my experience as a man, or a spirit in human form. And there's a great saying that we're spirits having a human experience, not humans having a spiritual one. That our essence is the breath of God, Goddess. That for me is really the fundamental meaning of what being awakened is that I'm a spirit living through a human form in this human life, really in the curriculum of Earth School, to learn the lessons that I am indeed a reflection and expression of divine, and to learn to live this way. And there's a great saying that I think is really apropos for this time, that breakthrough comes after breakdown. And you have to see what isn't working in order to make a conscious decision to create what does work. So, a heightened mind or an elevated mind sees the larger perspectives of what's going on, not just the immediacy of real-time reality, which is playing out in the news. And there's so many different angles and so many different aspects to this. My insightful way of living is to keep it really simple. And the way that I've learned to do that is to be as present as I possibly can in the only place where life takes place, which is the present moment. Spirit only lives now. And to the degree that I can be present in this present moment allows me to access what's called higher mind, or the spiritual qualities of my soul, which is love, is joy, is compassion, is gratitude, is forgiveness and faith and trust, which has nothing to do with any religious doctrine. It has to do with living from heart space place. Interesting, you mentioned earlier before we got on, Leslie, that you were born in Puerto Rico, came to the States when you were a young girl. I was raised in the south side of Chicago in the early 60s. And the neighborhood that I grew up in, Hyde Park, was the first, initially the only neighborhood that would allow Black kids. There were Negroes back then. This is right when the civil rights got traction as far as implementing the mandate that Black kids had to come into the public school system. Anyway, so from 1 year, and I was a young kid, I was 6 or 7 years old, 8 years old. From 1 year, I went from being a normal middle-class white kid in a normal middle-class neighborhood to getting my ass kicked going to school, being a honky, whitey, and cracker, not having any idea of the pain of this societal group of African Americans. And I learned what it was like to see reality from the other side, from a minority. And what happened was, I was really good in sports. I was a natural leader. And as you know, kids in inner city or in cities, it's how you play together that really defines who you are and how you relate in a community setting. And I learned that if I could talk to whoever was in front of me like he was almost a part of me, it was something that I was born with. That if I could connect in respect, in honor of who they were, aside from what they look like, their color, their financials, how they behaved, how they all of that, I found that I got along better, and I made friends and I kept friends, and that for me has been one of the guiding forces of my life is how to get along with other people. And I find that if I do that from my heart space, and of course, as it played out through my life, interestingly, oddly enough, I began meditating formally with an Indian guru at the age of 13.
Yeah.
And I found that the heart space is a place where we all come together. It's the only place where all differences, all separation, all breakdowns can become whole or can merge into a sense of I won't say oneness, but a sense of equanimity.
Yeah.
So this is what I've learned to do just to get by, just to make it through my life. And I've learned to do the kind of work I do. I'm a clairvoyant, I'm medical intuitive. I was born highly empathic at birth. And I've just happened to, the way my soul contract or my life's contract is to develop these qualities. I went into healing work very early on, and I found that I had a gift and ability to read into the human field or the energy systems. And my desire of my deepest soul longing is to create a bridge first in myself. It's been a lot of work, decades of work, unraveling my shadow, so that I can be a bridge for other people to find the bridge in themselves to create a life that's more fulfilling. It's not religious. It's really about more love, more joy, more play, more connectivity, and more of a sense of being part of a whole as opposed to being separate individual trying to get my needs met. And I think we've basically run out of a program on this planet. I'm not going to just say it's the old patriarchal mindset of my will over your will. You're in politics, so you understand how this plays out.
Yeah.
That, you know, the old golden rule is that those who have the gold rule. And the way you get power on this planet up until now is to take it from other people. You know, I don't know how many years we have left on this planet, ecologically, financially, all the different support systems in this planet are close to the edge of breaking down. We're seeing that with this virus, how quickly it affects. So it's about finding, for me, the one place that within everybody we can find home base, and we connect to other people in compassion, which is one of the most amazing. You asked that question initially. What's been the purpose of this virus on a spiritual level is to break us down so that we can find how to serve each other, how to serve the whole. Thank you.
And you know what, Keith, to your point, and to just piggyback on what you're saying, we have to look at the positive things that and the outcomes this COVID-19 has done to this world. We have seen positive things. People are, they're supporting each other. They're being generous. There's this unconditional love and compassion to help. Look at the folks that are out in the front lines, that are health work. Yeah. And so this has really have brought people together. And this is the positive thing. This law of attraction that we can get into in a minute has brought people together in many ways from all different walks of life. And that is a positive thing that we're not talking about. And to see that is very uplifting. It gives you a different perspective on exactly what you're saying. When people come together and they put their indifferences aside, and you come to the right heart space, there's that love, that unconditional love. There's that compassion and that generosity that comes forth that you don't even realize is there.
Exactly.
So that is amazing. All this, I think, has happened with a purpose, and I believe that. I really believe that things happen for a reason, and I think we're in that transition, in that process of
That's right.
transformation
Yes,
this
we are.
entire world it is. William, you are a certified yoga master and a New World activist. I don't know what that means, but we're going to get into what the New World activist in a little bit. You have been immersed, or you were immersed in this top secret defense contracting. I also worked for the Department of Defense in my previous life. um, and you talk about false programs and agendas that keep humans enslaved in darkness. What do you mean by that? Introduce yourself to the world. And let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, thanks for inviting me on, Leslie. And it's been a pleasure working with Jacqueline and Keith. I came to this really unexpectedly. It's been a lot of twists and turns, but I feel like it's just synergistically just happened over the last few months. So when you say darkness and defining what that means, and I feel like there's a lot of things in your life you have to go through personally and experience to understand them and to create the transformation in order to start the process of transcendence. And then just amazing synchronicities happen. People come into your life and you're able to take that next step into like a new reality, at least glimpse a new reality. And for me, it's been just a very almost torturous process moving ahead out of some of the things I was involved in. But I feel that like every day is like a new challenge. You got to engage it. And like Keith says, live in the present.
Yeah. And part of this process, Keith, but before we get into that, I just want to say, and for the people that are listening and to our audience that's tuning in, Keith is in, Keith, you're in Washington.
Olympia, Washington.
Olympia, Washington. Jacqueline is also in Washington.
DC.
The
Yeah.
DC one.
And DC.
I'm in
That
the
way.
DC one.
DC. I'm on
DC
the
one.
opposite side of the
East side.
planet.
I'm the west side. She's east side.
She's Western. Okay. And William is in Colorado.
In the middle.
That's right. Smack in the middle.
So all these folks have come together amazingly. Now, before I continue with the question, how did you guys meet? Because this synergy and this energy between you guys is amazing.
Well, I don't know if you've ever heard of the 6 degrees of separation.
Yes.
Okay, so I had gone to a massive meeting, about 35 people, and with CH2M Hill, and sat down. I shouldn't have said that name of that company, but 32 people in a massive conference room. And the president of the company came in and sat down at the head of the table. He said, before we do anything, he said, have you all heard about the 6 degrees of separation? Yes, we did. He said, well, I want to prove to you that we're not 6 degrees anymore. We are at 2 degrees. I would almost say that we're at 1 degree, but we went around the table. It was just, he said, I do this at every meeting I attend. And he said, over the past year and a half, 2 years, I have developed this theory that we're at 2 degrees. And do you know that we came in from all Texas, East Coast, that it in fact proved, as we went around, this guy went to this college and the father knew this father and the daughter was it, and it proved this 2 degree separation. You are correct. Our current landscape is that I can be, and I don't use the word intimately as sexually, but I can be intimately and vulnerably involved with you, and you live across the other side of the planet. And that is one of the positives right now. That is one of the beauties, is that we're engaging in a level of connection that we have never engaged in before. So Keith, I met Keith on, he was doing a live stream on Facebook, and he was actually had gotten into his heart space and was talking through his heart. And I had just come out and was going through some dark times, and just that transmission of energy touched my heart in such a way that I reached out to Keith and said, whoa, I just really did appreciate a man, because that's kind of what his practice is talking about awakening the sacred masculine,
Right.
and what the male goes through to come out of his, wearing of all these masks and protecting his image and being dominant and often very harsh and unsensitive. I really respected Keith for the gentleness and the tenderness that he publicly conveyed. So that's how we met.
Yeah.
William, gosh, we met at Starbucks, and that's the law of attraction.
Yeah.
Because
The latte, the latte law.
we are humans.
Well-
We are vibration, we are energy, and we will sync. This is part of the law of attraction. We will sync with the energies that we are. And so
I have to add something here. You at that Starbucks, you knew everybody at that Starbucks. That was your jam, and so that was my Starbucks too. So we had to meet each other.
that's correct. That's
Yeah.
correct.
Well,
So
but William, we have a soft spot for you because you are a native from Philadelphia. You went to Penn. So
Yes, I did.
okay. So
Yeah.
we have a soft spot for you. Aissia Richardson, my co-host here. You can chime in. Tell us a little bit about your experience. Because I know you also have a spiritual realm. You don't talk much about it, but you do have that spiritual aspect to you.
Sure.
Just share a little bit with us in regards to that.
Well, I'm a deep listener, and that helps me in my job. It helps me to be able to do the constituent services work that's needed, and to be able to help people in crisis. I work for an elected official or a public servant, but I grew up as an AK. I'm an activist kid. My mom was involved in the civil rights movement. She was a fundraiser along with her parents. She has 7 siblings. They all were involved in the different movements that really pushed at the edges of policy in the United States. So she was involved in the women's movement. She was involved in the women's health movement. She's a feminist. And she also, she wanted to be a nurse, and she was told by her teachers, because she was Black, she would be better suited to be a secretary. So as she got older, and as she began to develop her skill sets, she actually ended up creating a women's health clinic for abortion and for family planning, and became a teacher of doctors. She was a gynecological model, and she taught doctors how to do gynecology with dignity, with women in mind, and to treat women with dignity during their appointments. So when I was 11, she sent me to Cuba to be able to meet with students, young people around the world, to be able to understand what their political struggles were. So I got a chance to meet with child soldiers from Angola. I got to meet with Palestinians, Chinese, Romanians, the Cuban people themselves. So I grew up not eating grapes in solidarity with farm workers. We grew up knowing that Chiquita killed the farm workers that were trying to unionize. So we never crossed union lines. We understood the value of work, and of these frontline workers are not getting the pay that they deserve, and they're putting their lives on the line. So I'm glad that I work for a legislator that's looking at sick pay for people who don't have it, and for $15 minimum wage for folks who are working minimum wage, but are working at Target, but are still making sure that we're getting our toilet paper. Right. So so in addition to growing up in an activist family, I grew up in the ethical humanist movement. My parents joined when I was very young. Well, they joined before I was born. They got married in the Philadelphia Ethical Society. So I grew up in a movement of folks that was based on non-theism, and also based on, so there were people who were Jewish, who were Christian, who were atheists, who were agnostic. And so there was a saying over the Philadelphia Ethical Society: the place where we seek the highest is holy ground. So if you are seeking the highest in all that you do, you stand in holy ground. And the philosophy of the Ethical Society is deed over creed. So when you are in this movement, you are seeking the best in yourself and the best in others. And wherever you go, that is what you project. You know, how you treat others, and bringing out the best in them while you bring out the best in yourself. And so it is an idealistic practice, but it is so valued and worth it because a lot of times people come to me in pain, and they are upset, and they take that pain out on me. But I try to push it back and say, that's not, you're angry because you can't cope. You're angry because you're an adult and you're not able to navigate a system. So the first thing that I say to people is thank you. Thank you for acknowledging that you need help, because that's what we're here for. And if I learn something new about helping you, then you've helped me. So thank you. Thank you for helping me.
And that is Heart Space Place. That is where you meet. And growing up in Chicago on the South Side, I grew up next to the largest Black Baptist church. Literally 10 feet, 15 feet from my window was this massive building. And one morning I heard the preacher preach that we have to repay the blessing. And for me, service is really important. Giving back, somehow being the beloved to the moment, to help people who can't help themselves, because that helps me, help them, helps them. It's all that one circuit of reciprocity. And I hear the devotion in your heart. I hear the commitment of your family, of your lineage, to make it a little easier for people who can't make it easy for themselves. And that really, I think, is a responsibility of an awakened soul, is to repay the blessing, however, whenever, wherever, and with whomever.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And William, as an RPCV, I know you know that feeling when you have gone into places to be able to, help people navigate the systems within systems. Because as a RPCV, you see people, you see a need, and it's a different reality, right? And so I always encourage travel. I take my daughter traveling. I've traveled myself, because when you go to a different country, you see different ways that people operate. You see different ways that people think. Right. And then you can incorporate that into seeing the world, right? Seeing the world not just as a physical place, but as a spiritual place.
That's exactly correct. Yeah, the connections I made over the years with people in other countries are it's amazing how you can keep them up these days with the technology, and to see how other people have been affected by this lockdown. It's more dramatic in other places, actually,
quite,
because the infrastructure isn't as established. So when people don't have food, they really don't have food. It's not like you can run down to the supermarket, or you can go to the bank. The bank actually shuts and doesn't open. You have to drive halfway across the country to get to a bank or something. So there's a lot of people in other countries that are going through this lockdown as well. And it's much more challenging, in my opinion, than what we're dealing with.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we're gonna take a short break, Aissia. We have to take a short break. You are listening to Keith, to William, to Aissia, to Jacqueline. We're all having the spiritual conversation called The Awakening. And so we'll be right back, and we'll continue this conversation after the short break. You're listening to Voices of Change on USALA Radio.
Don't wait. Communicate. Make your emergency plan today.
Thank you and welcome back. You're listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio. The topic of our show today is the awakening. We're talking about the spiritual aspect. What is the spiritual awakening and why does that happen in the midst of despair and uncertainty? And obviously we're going through that right now. We are talking with Keith Gregory, with William, and with Jacqueline, all who have experience in the spiritual realm. And we're having this great conversation of how this movement, the spiritual awakening, I believe, in my view, is a movement or a shift in consciousness. And I think that is exactly what's happening today in this world. We are having a shift in this consciousness. Would you agree with that, Jacqueline?
Well, that is precisely what this is about. You know, as we look at the evolution of consciousness and how a consciousness actually evolves, when the being is like a child, you know, when the child has gone through the stages of development properly, a child leaves home and becomes its own identity. You know, humans for thousands of years have been enslaved in pain and suffering and grief, creating these false external identities instead of being aware of the internal divine identity that is highly empowered. So this is just a global condition that is allowing people to step back. Most people are in what's called a reactive, impulsive state of mind, where they are very identified externally. So I am my name, I am my clothes, I am my titles, I am mother, sister, brother, and there's no inner self-awareness. And so as external events happen, their chain is jerked, and they're very reactive to what is going on externally. It's not until we have a shattering where that external shell, that external identity is shattered, is unraveled, that allows the being to begin to question what is reality? Who am I? Why am I here? What is life? And this is a very divinely ordered time event. We call this the event, the shift. It's, you know, I was raised in the church and I still do love scripture. The harvest, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the harvest, the 10 virgins going out into the wilderness waiting for the groom. But 5 of them did not make it and had to go back into the city. 5 of them were able to make the choice to remain in solitude and be quiet and pull back from that reactive state and take personal control of what's going on internally, because that fear is very gripping and it's very frightening. It's very enslaving. That kind of fear mongering is really the cause of pain and suffering. But when one can break that external shell and find their divine identity and really connect with that and realize the power that is truly ours, we are 1,000 times more powerful than the enemy. And right now the enemy is really working overtime to keep us enslaved, to keep us in that fear bondage. So this particular time is for just that. It's to enable the individual through this time of solitude, to come back to their roots, to come back home, spend some time quiet in reflection, and really ask some very vital questions that are really of an eternal nature. We realize 80 years of life is nothing compared to an eternal stance. So this is really a beautiful time. And if we can get the purpose and of this time and truly engage in becoming a participant in this moment, there's really a powerful effect that can take place.
Yeah,
I just real quickly want to say, there are global meditations taking place. The actual resonance of the harmonic resonance of Earth during those global meditations have actually been graphed on NASA's resonance graphs, showing the increase in vibrations across the planet. We can affect a change. We can affect the healing of the planet, and we can affect the healing of the suffering of human beings on the planet. So
I agree.
It's a powerful time.
I think the soul is crying for freedom, Keith.
Hey,
I think the soul is crying for freedom, and that's a powerful, powerful thing. Go ahead, Keith.
It's interesting you speak of the earth, Jackie, and I wanted to speak of that. I don't know if you've been following, I'm sure you have, but I think within a week and a half after the lockdown, there were dolphins swimming in the Venetian canals, that there was no smog, relatively speaking, in LA, that the earth has upgraded or the pollution is cleared. It's amazing how quickly the earth comes into balance or into equanimity when humans aren't in the way. And the greed, the desire to serve my need, and speaking of the masculine, the bugaboo or the shadow of the masculine, by the way, which is not gender specific. We carry that. We carry the feminine, the anima, the animus. But it's the misuse and abuse of will and the misuse and abuse of power. As soon as we step back, the earth will come back into balance, relatively speaking. But it's taken us breaking down and really going into retreat, really going into almost a hibernation state that has shown us how quickly the earth does come back into a state of homeostasis, relatively speaking. So, when our external support systems, when our external identity, when our familiarity and our comfort start to get taken away, when we're sequestered or quarantined at home, you gotta look inside. You gotta look under the carpet, under the floorboard, into the basement of your life to see what's really been running you. And as Jackie has been saying, part of the human reactivity equation is fear up until now. And if we live in fear and react from fear, we create fear-based experiences. If we come to our heart, if we come to the place where we do meet, if we do connect to our soul, is that the dog? It is. And see that we are all one, and that we do carry the breath of the divine in us, it's a whole lot easier to get along and a whole lot easier to create a life that serves everybody, not just the elite few.
Yeah. And you know what, Keith, William, and Jacqueline, and Aissia, I think the consciousness is shifting from contracted states of, I would say, fear, anger, or hurt to expanded states of peace and joy, from lack to supply, from hate to love, from pain and suffering to a sense of well-being. I think.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in there. I think we could just maybe put one word to that, and that's like people are being inspired by the examples they're seeing in others. And that inspiration is very deep, and that shift can occur very quickly when you're inspired by seeing somebody else living a different life that is more expanded and more in resonance with not just the people around them, but that person's soul.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
just as semantics, the root word of inspiration is the same root word of respiration, which is spirit. And the way that I've found to get into spirit is to get into my breath, to get into my heart space, to get into my body. But that's the one thing that we all share in common is our spirit. So it seems to make really clear sense, especially in this global crisis, that if we can find a way to connect into the one thing that we all resonate in, we have a much better chance, not just of surviving, but of prospering. And this is the age to prosper, and not just to survive, and not just to struggle, and not just to try and get my needs met. It means going from me to we. That's where the power of grace lives, is when I go from me to we. And I know that if we're going to make it through this, and we will make it through it, it's going to be, how do we make it through it?
Yeah. And I think that the more people connect to their soul and to their heart space, whether accidentally or intentionally, when people connect to that, I think they experience a transformation, a powerful transformation that you cannot ignore. And I think a lot of people we're in that process right now.
Well,
So
and
it's
that,
interesting that you talk about transformation and sort of this issue of spirituality. This is the month of Ramadan.
Yes,
and Ramadan is communally celebrated.
Mhm.
And so it's part of the faith that folks celebrate together and read the Quran together. And so in this age where you have to practice social distancing, it's very difficult for that to be practiced. And so one of the things that the leadership of the Muslim community has been doing is saying, you can practice at home, you can practice through social media or through the virtual tools, because we all have to be safe coming out. And so, but people are so there's a population of folks that really don't want to do that. They want to gather because it's part of their faith. So there's a constant reminder to from the leadership of the Muslim community in across the country to practice your faith, but practice it safely. And so you can't demand that. You have to ask. You have to ask people
respectfully,
to reflect, respectfully, because these are issues that are ingrained in people. And so this issue of transformation, I think, is a universal one. And yes, people are in crisis, yes, people are struggling, and the sort of the social worker in us, Leslie,
Yes.
is we know we have to stabilize people, we have to stabilize families, we have to stabilize fragile communities. And there's been a lot of mutual aid that's been happening, particularly in fragile communities. Mutual aid for folks who are undocumented, who can't get any of the support, and are don't have any food. I mean, William talked about folks in outside of the United States, when they don't have food, they don't have food, right? And so if you're undocumented and you can't prove that you can't prove that you're here in the country legally, then that means that you can't work, you can't get social services, you can't feed your family. So there are bands of people that have gotten together to provide support for communities that are really struggling. So and that's uplifting, right? I mean, I think that shift that Jacqueline was talking about is this issue of how do we support each other through crisis? How do we take breaths and don't worry about the cracks in our kitchen floors, or the things that we don't have, and focus on, what others need. And I think that is the shift that is being experienced sort of worldwide. And we're not going to get back to normal. We're not going to travel. We're not going to have sports events. We're not going to meet and greet the ways that we used to. We're probably not gonna hug, we're not gonna kiss each other on the cheek. So we have to be able to have our spirit shine through to show our love for humanity and our love for each other.
Yeah, yeah, it's coming to a screeching halt, all of this. And, you know, we spend so much time as human beings in pursuing, I would say, the emptiness of money, fame, power, respect, in an attempt to find happiness. We're trying to find all those things in the wrong places. And we have to start looking to find these things in the right places. And then the only, I think, space we can find that is by having that shift in our consciousness.
Yeah.
And I think we're going through, I think, Jacqueline, we're going through that right now. And I think this is a root of awakening for all of us in this country, worldwide. This is a root of awakening.
Right.
Stop and think, reflect, meditate, and rest. What Keith was saying. What say you?
Yeah.
Well, when all of the sudden those external things that we fought for and would do anything for, all of a sudden we begin to have a real grasping of the really lack of value that they really have, then we begin to really search for, well, wow, my entire portfolio of what I had listed as my value is just null and void. Then I really desire, hunger and thirst. This is the time where we begin to hunger and thirst to find a higher value and something that is much more substantial, that is not temporal, something that is eternal, that is immutable. And when we can truly, I mean, this is where real majesty and opulence and the high states of vibration, and like you said, Leslie, and I really do like that, we have lived in such a contracted state of consciousness. When you can let go and step into an expanded sense of reality, we begin seeing things that we've never seen before. And that is the place where the new world will be created. When we see something that is much higher than designer jeans, that the spirit that Aissia talked about, that we are spirit, when we begin connecting at that level, we're going to have a supernova explosion.
Yeah, we're actually almost concluding the show. This is an interesting conversation. We only have an hour. I wish we can continue to have this conversation, but our time has ended. Before we go, though, I want to say to William, I believe one of the oldest yoga masters, she passed away, teachers. She passed away, I believe, Portia Lynch is her name. Is that right?
Sounds familiar, yeah.
She died at 101 years old.
Wow.
She was one of the oldest yoga teachers who marched also with Gandhi, died at 101 years old. And I wanted to mention that because I know you are a yoga teacher. And so I wanted to just throw that out there. But Jacqueline, Aissia, Keith, it's a pleasure. William, I mean, we definitely have to do this again and have this conversation and continue to have these conversations, uplifting conversations, because we need it right now. There's too much doom, there's too much depression, there's too much people in a sad state, and I think we need to have positive and uplifting messages that we can create and we can put out there in the public square. What say you, Keith?
You know, I want to do a shout out to the woman who brought me here. I wouldn't be here without Jacqueline. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you so much, sister. And thank you, Aissia, for, the history and the tradition and the fact that you are the shining light that your ancestors would want to be you. And you just touch lives just by being alive. I'm really moved and touched. Thank you, William, for being our liaison here. And I've been trying to reach out to you, Leslie, since I first connected with Jackie, just to say thank you. Bless you for your work.
Thank you all. And we have concluded the show. You are listening to Voices of Change on Usula Radio, and we'll see you next Saturday. Thank
Yay.
you. Aisha, thank you.
Yay!
Stay well, everybody. Stay well.
Oh!
All right.
Let's